The work that we as More Equitable Democracy have been doing is supporting our 20 different partners in the Electoral Justice Initiative and supporting other allies to walk with us on this path towards deep systems change. And one of the things that we have done over the last couple of years is we've organized learning tours to different countries to understand how those communities, those societies became democracies and how they developed their own rules of the game to build a democracy where everyone has a voice. And so really, this is about our partners becoming experts, their own experts, so it's not just calling Colin all the time, like how do we explain single transferable vote again? And it's also deeper than that. It's also about allowing ourselves to imagine a different future. Because without that imagination, we're always just going to kind of tinker around the edges. And so our first learning tour was to Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and we also made a one-day trip up to the North or Northern Ireland. And so one of the things we brought also our advisory board members, Spencer came with us. So first question to you, Spencer. Before you went on the first trip to Ireland, what did you hope to get out of that first learning tour?
Yeah. Thanks, George. You know, I teach election law, so I really thought that just like I went to be a poll worker and learn some things that I didn't understand, I figured, okay, you know, I teach PR, I'll go and I'll learn some basic things about it in a different way and I'll have a deeper understanding, right? Now, that was absolutely right, but there was just so much more in terms of some of the historical and cultural conflicts in both, you know, Ireland, in terms of both the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, as well as Germany, you know, how electoral systems help to navigate those conflicts, and just kind of drawing parallels to the United States and like envisioning our future and realizing that these places changed or intentionally adopted particular systems here, and realizing that we could do the same. So I had not, George, anticipated that, and I trust we'll get deeper into that as we move on in our conversation.
Thank you. All right, let's take our first trip over the pond to Ireland and the north of Ireland, also called Northern Ireland. We are excited to be joined by Gerry Lynch, who is the former executive director of the Northern Ireland Alliance Party. So just for the kind of Cliff Notes version, because there's many, many hundreds of years of history that we won't talk about, but for the sake of just like giving the American version, because, you know, I'll say
500 years of Irish history in 4 minutes, no problem.
But there's a podcast for that. It's called The Future of Our Former Democracy, so check it out if you haven't heard. I hear it's really good. I hear it's award-winning. But I think for the American perspective, what we all need to understand is that Ireland was essentially England and Britain's first foray into settler colonialism.
Very much. So somebody I was speaking to earlier in the day over breakfast who didn't know much about Ireland said, now what I see there is you've got a bunch of white people fighting about religion. Okay? So you don't see any ethnic difference because we all have the same skin color, we're all Christians, and we all have the same funny accent. And actually, I could take you to Iraq, and you might say, you don't see any difference there. They're all people who speak Arabic, are Muslims, which is another country with ethno-sectarian problems, and they all speak Arabic. They're all kind of light brown-skinned, and they're all Muslims. The Irish conflict in the 16th century is at first very heavily a religious conflict, and Europe is convulsed by religious conflict in the time. Ireland has kind of been dominated by England for a couple of hundred years, but in a very light touch way, and especially when you get into the boonies, you hardly even know the English are there. And that happens in lots of places in Europe. And you have kind of junior local nobles who work to the big imperial boss somewhere else. What changes it is the referendum. Ireland remains Catholic. Everything on the other side of the Irish Sea goes Protestant. So Wales, which is also a Celtic country where many people speak a different language with issues of peripherality and historically of great poverty, doesn't have the same issues at all because it becomes Protestant, becomes very definitely Protestant. So Ireland is this difficult, poor client state. And all of a sudden in the 1500s, that becomes dangerous because it's also staid Catholic, while you've gone Protestant, and all of a sudden you have a big geopolitical problem. So, because it's a potential invasion route, it's your soft underbelly. The Spanish, the English and the Spanish are fighting big Reformation wars in far Western Europe. For England, Ireland is the soft underbelly that the Spanish can use with a sympathetic Catholic population and attack you from the side. So one of the things they do to try and pacify it is move Protestants from England and Scotland. I'm really simplifying a complex process by saying that, but move Protestants from England and Scotland to Ireland. And in most of the country, they're kind of 10, 15% of the population. But in Ulster, the northern province, which had been particularly difficult, wild and fractious, and fought a very bitter war with the English that lasted 9 years, about 1600, they actually become a majority of the population. We're not going to fast forward 250, 300 years. We come to the 1800s, a number of things are happening. Nationalism is becoming a thing in Europe. You don't look to the king as the natural boss. It's my people should govern ourselves. Wasn't such a big thing before that. The franchise is being expanded. So in 1830, before the first big extension of the right to vote in the United Kingdom, which by that time included all of Ireland, about 1% of men could vote. In 1832, they expanded it to 5%. By 1870, it's about 70% of men in England. It's a huge extension of the right to vote. It's not the universal franchise. In Ireland, it's maybe 45, 50%. And that's partly because it's really a head of household franchise. And Irish people tend to live in bigger extended families than English people even now. So a lot of just ordinary and actually quite poor Irish people start getting the vote, and they want more self-government. And this convulses the British political system, 1890s, 1900s. This is like Brexit was today. And then the First World War happens. Europe is convulsed as much as it has been since the Reformation. The Republic of Ireland becomes an independent state at the end of that. But the North still has a Protestant majority. They do not want to be part of this independent state. Firstly, you're leaving the British Empire, which is a big economic unit, for an independence that you kind of don't want. It doesn't feel like a good deal. And they're also afraid that the South will become a clericalist Catholic state. So this northern state remains part of the UK, but it's very light touch. It's ironically having the self-government within the empire that nationalists had always wanted. And then these two states really do become each other's kind of worst. Each side gets the worst nightmare vision of the other. So they do become the South becomes a very clericalist Catholic state. The North becomes dominated by a very reactionary, right-wing, supremacist form of Britishness, which looks down at the native Irish only partly because they're Catholic. In the South, the Protestant minority is small, and it gets much smaller. So they're not a big political factor. But in the North, the Catholics are about a third of the population.
One quick story that I'd like you to tell is, I watched Downton Abbey, so World War I changes everything in Europe.
Sorry.
Well, at least in the UK. Right.
No, it does in the whole of Europe. Yeah.
Right, the whole of Europe just convulses. But there's an interesting story about how the election of 1918 sets the stage for Ireland to adopt single transferable vote or proportional ranked choice voting. Say a little bit about that election.
So the 1918 election is the first one with universal male franchise. All men over 21 have the vote. There's no longer any property qualification. And all women over 30 have the vote. So women get the vote for the first time. But there's a differential age at first. Then 11 years later, then it's just universal male-female franchise. So it's a totally earth-shattering election. In Ireland, the last years of the war have been very radicalizing. And there is an upsurge in support in the population for outright independence. And in this general election of 1918, this relatively new and suddenly very radical party, although they hadn't been until before then, Sinn Féin, which is demanding outright independence, get 51% of the vote across Ireland, but they win almost every seat outside these Protestant bits of the north. I think there's like 2 or 3 seats they don't win. They get like 85% of the seats on 51%.
Why is there such a disparity in terms of only winning about 51% and winning almost all the seats?
You got it, because they're getting 51% of the vote everywhere, and their opposition is split and is getting, 49% of the vote lots of places. They win lots of seats, 55-45. Lots and lots and lots of them.
Just to underscore, we, the United States, have a winner-take-all first-past-the-post system because we are a former British colony, the same way that Ireland was. So, please.
So the British, and it's very seriously considered in Britain as well. It passes the lower house of Parliament and is blocked in the upper house for the whole of the UK, including England. But in Ireland, the single transferable vote system is imposed because the Brits don't want this nightmare scenario. But we rapidly end up in a series of civil wars. Actually, the late teens, early 20s in Europe is really horrid. And at the end of that, the Republic of Ireland becomes independent, and so does the North. They both have single transferable vote. The North only has 2 general elections using that, and then the Unionists abolish it and go back to first past the post, and they can kind of fossilize. They give the nationalists, they give the Catholic pro-Irish parties the 12 seats they had in the last election under proportional representation out of 52. They keep 40 for themselves. They do like a big incumbent protection gerrymander. And all the forces that might have shaken things up, the socialists, the liberals, the rural agrarian radicals, they're just crushed then at that point. They can't win seats if they have to win a whole district. So this...
And let me ask you this. Why in the South do the Protestants, why are they open to or attracted to single transferable vote in the South?
No, the South is a 90% plus Catholic country.
Right. And
so
why is that important?
There is more rotation of office between parties in the South. You don't have this ethno-sectarian cleavage. It's a very homogenous society. And actually, the biggest party tries to abolish PR twice. But when they get a constitution in 1937, it's written into the constitution, so they have to win a referendum. And there's a referendum in 1958, and PR survives by the skin of its teeth, 51.7 to 48.3%, really wafer thin. And then the biggest party comes back again, 11, which is kind of like a centrist blancmange, slightly populist centrist blancmange party. They come back in 68 or 69 and try to abolish PR again and go to single member districts, and they get crushed 61-39. And that's the end of it. Nobody's even raised the question.
Okay, so this helps set the stage for Northern Ireland, which after those 2 elections, they go back to first past the post because they can just dominate.
They can, and nobody can threaten them. So in the 60s, the Socialist Party, the Labour Party is getting about 25% of the vote. Various nationalist parties are getting about 20%. But the Labour Party can never, they're losing seats to the Unionist Party, 50-25 everywhere. Okay. So they only ever get a handful of seats. And then in the late 60s, so there's a lot of discrimination in Northern Ireland. There's not outright persecution, not like death camps or anything like that, but definitely there's a lot of discrimination against Catholics. There are glass ceilings in all sorts of employers. There's a lot of gerrymandering of municipalities, of city and county councils. So places that maybe have a 3-2 Catholic Irish nationalist majority, they tinker with the boundaries. They use block voting, so they have like 6 or 8 members of the council being elected from one ward, and then that makes it really easy. If you have that system in your city, it makes it really easy to play with the boundaries and gerrymander it. So we have a long history of gerrymandering.
So you're saying gerrymandering is not just an American thing?
Gerrymandering is possible in any district-based electoral system, and if you have 1 member per constituency, it's bad. And if you have slates, if you've got like 3 or 6 and you're voting by 3 X's or 6 X's, so it's really widely prone to it. But a civil rights movement emerges in the late 60s. Like lots of places, it's I don't need to belabor this point with Americans, right? It's in the air in the late 60s. And it's very broad-based. It runs from the hard left to revolutionary conservative Republican nationalists, to kind of middle-class liberals, even kind of centre-right people. And they come up with very moderate demands: end to job discrimination, fair allocation of public housing, an end to gerrymandering, and one person, one vote. But this is a powder keg society. So this has been one of the most peaceful places on earth. Northern Ireland, which isn't big, but it has the population of Nebraska. There are 2 years in the 1950s when it doesn't record a single homicide for the whole year. It is an unfair, quite poor, but very conservative and settled kind of place. And then it just explodes. So we go into this negative spiral. Nobody trusts one another. These quite moderate civil rights demands are seen by a lot of the unionists as a front for communist revolution, which is also going to be ultra-Catholic. They overreact. That in turn pushes the radicals off the edges of the civil rights movement. They start going, and no, your stupid little protests and petitions. We're going to shoot some of these. We'll see what happens then. Plant a few bombs and see how they like it. Between 68 and 72, we go from an entirely peaceful civil rights movement in a country that goes through some years with no murders to in a place with the population of Nebraska, between 250 and 500 murders a year in political violence. And that lasts for 4 years. We look over the abyss of a full outright civil war of something like happened in the former Yugoslavia. This is the worst outbreak of violence in Europe between the end of the Second World War and the Yugoslav Wars of Succession in the 1990s. And there's a lot of, well beyond the murder statistics, there's a lot of driving people out of communities. So poorer communities in particular, public housing projects become single identity. If you're a Catholic and you're living in a Protestant housing project, in the early 70s you're probably put out. If you're a Protestant and you're living in a predominantly Catholic housing project, guerrilla people put you out. You're a threat to their control. Maybe you're working for the other side, maybe you're helping the authorities, you're gone. So this is also the biggest forced movement of people. In a population then of about 1.3 million, something like 150,000 people move forcibly between 1969 and 1975. So over 10% of the population is intimidated out of their homes in 6 years. Am I timing? Yeah, it's timing, isn't it?
Yes. So let's. There's too much to cover. So let's move on to Germany. We kind of now are to the point where we have some major divides in the north. Let's go to Germany. Once again, the Cliff Notes version that I'll give can be covered in season 2 of The Future of Our Former Democracy. So check it out. I hear it's really good. They've won some awards. All right. So, Charlie, thank you for flying from Germany to here.
You're welcome.
So once again, the Cliff Notes version for us is that Germany actually, even though there's lots of old buildings, is a relatively new country in the 19th century, kind of like a Texas and California and Maryland get together and let's form a country. What's interesting is that once again, the convulsion of World War I happens, and that kind of regime of a king, essentially, royalty, is swept away and is replaced by the First Republic, the Weimar Republic. So tell us a little bit about how the system, the first election under the Weimar Republic, or the first series of elections, what system did they use, and how did that actually lead to the rise of Hitler?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Germany used to be a monarchy, and after World War I, Germany was the only, Germany was the complete loser. There was the Treaty of Versailles. There was Germany had to sign it that Germany had the whole responsibility of the World War on their shoulders, which meant also that they had to pay a lot of reparation costs, that they had to had to give up a lot of territories, that they lost a lot of territories, and it was the war guilt clause that Germany was guilty. Just Germany was guilty for the World War, and kind of faced all that on its own, which kind of led to extreme polarization among the parties also, like within the left parties and the right parties, and but still they managed to form the first German democracy in after the war, which is actually amazing that they managed to make that, and that they were also, you know, supported by the winning countries also with that. So what happened was that it was like an experiment, because nobody really had experience in that type of field. Like nobody really, also the society was not, I would say they weren't really prepared to live in a democracy, because they weren't used to that. They were used to being ruled, they were used to being kind of controlled, because the emperor kind of ruled without parties. He had the absolute power, like he was in charge of everything. So the people kind of had to adapt to that, which was probably a challenge, and they didn't really. So it was like they just were trying things out and didn't maybe think it through. So they were just see how it's going to be, and so the way the parliament worked was that it was a proportional PR.
Right, a closed list system in
Yes,
English.
yes. But there was no like 5% threshold, which is what we use today to prevent fragmentation within the parliament. So what happened was there were a lot of small parties that made it into parliament. So a lot of like just a lot of broad variety within the parties, and not so it was hard to form a coalition. So which made it easy for the right and left-wing parties to kind of disturb within the governing process and kind of block decisions also. And another thing was that the president of the republic had almost as much power as the emperor had. So he was able to abolish the parliament, or the reigning government, and to just announce a new one, which happened a couple of times actually, until 1933, when, as we all know, when the Nazis took over, or Hitler didn't take over, how it's always framed. Actually, the reign was given to him, so there was no real push, like, what do you say, like a
Process.
A process, yeah. So because of the system, of the whole system, how it was built, it was easy for him to kind of undermine it, to work with the system to get to the power of that.
To play on the paralysis, make
Yes.
it worse so that nothing could be decided, and then
Yes.
say, look, nothing's happening, so
Yeah,
point me, I can take over.
Because no one had experience, right? So they were just trying out, and Hitler kind of used that for his own advantage. Sorry, I have to ask the Irish word.
So just to fast forward, so right, we know what happens. Germany loses World
Yes.
War II.
Yes, again.
And then the Allies essentially, what do?
So you all probably know about the Cold War, right? About the
I'm sorry, just in terms of how they set up the Constitution.
Oh, yeah. So that was, because that's why I'm mentioning the Cold War, because that's kind of important, because at first there was like this, I think they were agreeing on that Germany can never become like a military force again, or like a strong economic country. But then, because of the differences between the West and the East, between the differences between the U.S. and the Soviet Union especially, they the Western allies kind of changed their mind and helped Germany to help the BRD, because Germany was divided at that time. Help the BRD to become like a powerful democratic state again. So what happened was that the western part of Germany, the BRD, they became a democracy again, and the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, which was under control of the Soviet Union, they became actually a dictatorship, which you can basically say that was a dictatorship until Germany was reunified in the 1990s, and it was.
And then
So-
the East essentially adopts the West's
Yes.
democracy. So just to underscore in the English version, in terms of the system, they adopt what we now call mixed member proportional with a 5% threshold. So
Yes.
tell us again, what does that 5% threshold mean?
So, as I said before, that in the Weimar Republic, there were a lot of parties that were part of the parliament, which could happen because there was no 5% threshold. So that says now that a party has to gain 5% of the votings, at least 5% of the votings, to make it into parliament. So that's how Germany wants to prevent fragmentation within the government, within the parliament.
Okay, let's pause and go back to Ireland for a second, or to the north of Ireland. Let's talk about the peace process and how it ends up with a proportional system. Can you give a 2-minute version on that?
So in the early years of the Troubles, there are a couple of attempts to stop this, to end this. We nearly have a peace agreement in 73. The British government forces reform on the local unionists even before that. And part of that is they bring back proportional representation by single transferable vote, or what do people call it here?
Proportional ranked choice voting.
Proportional ranked choice voting. And that's introduced in 73. But that can't magically stop anything. You have a broken society where tensions that have been suppressed for a long time, for centuries in some cases, have come out with a lot of bloodletting. So we're also going and voting every few years. We're electing our councillors by proportional ranked choice voting. We're electing members of the European Parliament from 1979 like that. We're also electing members of the British Parliament by X-vote in single-member districts like you would. But it doesn't magic an answer. A lot of other things have to happen. And ironically, like Germany, probably the end of the Cold War is part of the backstory in Northern Ireland. Even there, just a sense that the world had changed. And in the mid-90s, there's just kind of a total exhaustion. Everybody knows nobody can win this. The British government, not the local British people, have kind of probably won it in the sense that they wanted this power sharing deal and for it all just to go away. But there's just a total war weariness and exhaustion, say among the IRA people. I grew up in I am not, but I grew up in a very kind of IRA stronghold community. So you had guys who started the revolution confident of rapid victory. They signed up as 18-year-olds in 1970, and they're now like 42. They've done a couple of spells in jail. They're no closer to winning, and now they're watching their kids maybe going to do the same thing. And you're going, I don't want my kid to spend 10 or 12 years in jail. What's that about? The unionists realize the demographics are shifting. If they don't make a deal now, the Catholic nationalist population is growing, and it's not a third anymore, it's over 2/5. So some of the clever ones are going, look, we've got to make a deal now. The longer we leave this, Britain is not ever letting us go back to majority rule. So the longer we leave this, the worse it gets. And there is an IRA ceasefire in 1994. The pro-British or local British community militias follow fairly quickly. And in 1998, we have a peace agreement. So we have a regional assembly, which is kind of like a state legislature here. Only a constitutional lawyer would be interested in the precise differences. We'll call it like a state legislature. It consists currently, because the numbers varied a bit, of 90 members elected in 18 districts, each of which returns 5 members by proportional ranked choice voting. And then we have compulsory power sharing. So there's a complex formula, but kind of usually about 9 or 10% of the vote is enough to guarantee you a place in the cabinet, and you can't be kicked out. Now, the proportional voting works really well. Unionists were always very against it. It's not British. We want to be the same as Britain. But what's happened is, as the demographics have shifted, there are a lot of areas where unionists have gone from being 50% of the population to 30 maybe. Well, in proportional voting, they still get 2 seats out of 5 in all those districts. If this was first past the post, they might just squeeze one in, or they might get nothing. They could lose them all. They could lose every single one, 60 to 30. So, especially unionists from those, where they're a large minority, kind of go, actually, this single transferable vote thing works quite well. And also, it's just become normal to us. The compulsory power sharing works less well because it's too rigid a system. There is no penalty to a party for being rubbish at government. And also, it presumes, like you would get in Germany or in Britain or in the Republic of Ireland, that a government has, at least the coalition parties have been able to hammer out a working agreement, and they all want it to work. They'll negotiate after the election a program for government, the Regierungsprogramm, and that's kind of course, they're all pushing at the edge and they don't like each other, but that's kind of the deal and they stick to it. In Northern Ireland, you can spend the entire 4-year legislative period before they even agree a program for government. And even in the best of circumstances, the DUP was kind of like a somewhat MAGA party. No, there probably were like a fusion between a religious right party and a MAGA party before you even knew MAGA existed. And Sinn Féin are a revolutionary left-wing party. Getting these guys to agree a program for government is never going to be easy. But,
So, just a quick question. Great history, Pastor, here, and political piece. You mentioned the fact that you were not in a particular political place. Did you have any personal connections to people who were, connected to the Troubles?
yeah, yes. Both my parents were active in the IRA. My mother died of natural causes, sadly, 4 years ago, and never got caught. But, you can't charge the dead, so we can talk about this. Mostly early on, though, her involvement was before I was born. She was terribly young. Even by the kind of rules that these guys had, it should never have happened, even in those very chaotic early years. And she was kind of scarred for life by it. She was transporting bombs because she was she's like me. She'd stand up in the middle of the room and talk to anybody and talk to strangers. She's 14 years old. She's carrying bombs about the place. The cops aren't going to search her, are they? And some of those bombs were used to do bad things, very bad things, and she couldn't talk about it. She'd never been charged. She never told me this, but you piece things together. Sometimes she had a few drinks in her, things would come out. And you start, especially as you get older, things she said to you when you were 7 or 8 or 9 years old that made no sense then. And you're kind of thinking about this when you're 45 or so, and you go, oh, bloody hell. My dad did 2 spells in jail. The first before I was born, the second from I was 3 and a half until I was 7 and a half. I wasn't the only kid in my elementary school who got, 1 half day off a week to go and see their dad in jail. I lived in a community where in my class of 31, there were 3 or 4 kids with something like that going on in their life.
But Gerry, then it's kind of similar to Germany, right? Because nobody really talks, like the families don't talk about if they were involved in anything going on, or it took them a long time to talk about it openly or to kind of, reflect on that time. And
Actually, I want to take that, and
yes,
we need to
that's
land the
kind
plane
of a
in the second part.
similarity.
But
Sorry.
just in terms of like the German piece, I feel like what we learned on our learning tour was there's a structural component, and then there's a culture of remembrance in Germany, which is kind of like 2 pieces that help prevent the far right from rising again. Can you say a little bit about how that works and how in the last election did it actually prevent the far right from grabbing power?
So, which is really important in Germany nowadays is the so-called Vergangenheitsbewältigung. Would you say it in English?
Coming to terms with the past.
Yeah, coming to terms with your past, or like remembrance culture. So it's what we do is that it's like mandatory for school classes to visit the concentration camps just to talk about what happened during the Nazi regime, because, as I said, it took Germany and its people a long time to really talk about it at first.
I've got a better translation for that. Vergangenheitsbewältigung, and this is really important as to how unique this is to Germany. It would literally mean confronting the past.
Yes, because and that didn't happen until 1968,
Yeah.
right? So it took the people and the society just so long to come to terms with what happened and to really reflect on what happened. And yeah, so this is such a big part of our identity today, I would say, even though it happened like almost 80 years ago. But still, because everybody has either a relative who, you know, was involved on one of the sides, or I know people who lost relatives in concentration camps. So that's kind of shaping our identity. And still today, it's the slogan we have. It's never again, and never again is even more important today regarding on what's happening in the current situation as well. But still, that didn't really help the conservative parties or even the right-wing parties to gain more power. Yeah, and still, we haven't found a good way to deal with that yet, I would say.
Well, no system is perfect, but what I think we brought back from the U.S. is that though the far-right party won 20% of the vote, none of the other parties actually entertained forming a coalition with them in serious ways.
And you still have to think about that 80% of the people didn't vote them, right? It's only still, I mean, 20% is a lot, but still 80% didn't cast a vote on the party.
I'll throw it over to Spencer for the last word in terms of any other takeaways in terms of, remembering the past is so clearly part of the history of the democracies that are developed in Northern Ireland and Germany, and yet remembering our past is a challenge here.
Yeah.
Thoughts about your reflections?
Yeah, sure. As a lawyer, I've always been into kind of structures, like if we just set this law, I think this concept of remembrance culture was so powerful in terms of the visit. It also gave me a new perspective on concepts like saying we're going to purge certain exhibits from the Smithsonian, or we're going to take 381 books out of the Naval Academy Library here, right? Or restore Confederate statues here, as well as restoring the base names of past Confederate soldiers. Like, this is about culture, and as opposed to us pretending that it's not, I think us being affirmative in terms of like remembrance culture and being honest about this and laying it out has got to be a part of us envisioning the future.
All right. Well, I think for me, this is all about, yes, we need to think about the structures, but this is also about a culture shift as well. So this is the work that you all are doing. Sure, we can have lawyers who can fight for us and get the right policies in place, but in the end, it's about how we live together differently, and that's about how we relate to one another.
Hey, if you made it to the end of the video, you must have liked what you saw. So you should head over to our website, equitabledemocracy.org, so you can sign up for our mailing list and stay up to date on all the new things we're working on. Also, if you want to head back to our YouTube channel, you can listen to our award-winning podcast, watch riveting documentaries, or check out new content just like this.